Hello there and welcome. So today I want to talk about a question that I've been asked loads of times over the years as an instructor and as a friend and a biker, and that is, what motorcycle should I buy as my first bike now I've passed my test? So that question has got so many answers. It's not a straightforward question. And I'm going to look at some of the thoughts that I have when I try and answer that question for people. What I can't tell you is you should buy this particular bike, because it's a lot more complex than that. So very often I've heard advice, and I've read a lot of this on forums as well. The advice is, for your first bike, don't get anything bigger than a 600. Now there's reasons for that, and that advice generally comes from people probably of my generation or so, when things were very different to how they are now. And prior to becoming a motorcycle instructor, I would absolutely have gone along with that advice, because biking back in the day, if you like, was like an apprenticeship. So if we just look for a moment, when I started biking in 1985. Now in February 1983, the rules about provisional motorcycle licences changed. And prior to that, you could ride on a provisional licence with L plates a 250, anything up to a 250cc motorcycle. Well, of course, as bikes got faster, more exciting, the accident rates went up, and so that was then changed to a 125cc motorcycle. So in 1986 I got my first 125cc motorcycle, and then back then you could ride that for 2 years on a provisional license, and if you didn't pass your test within 2 years, they used to take your license away from you for a year, because the idea was you're supposed to pass your test, and if you didn't, that was it, you couldn't ride for a year. Well, that was obviously deemed unfair, and I can't remember what year it was, but they changed that ruling. So the CBT was brought in around about 1990, and it was revised in its current form in 1997. Now when I did my motorcycle test back in the 80s, we started off with a thing called a Part 1. Now the Part 1 was like a mini CBT. And once you got your Part 1, you could then apply for your motorcycle test, and you could go to any test centre, and the examiner walked, believe it or not. He didn't follow you in a car, or he didn't follow you on a bike. He walked around and he watched you go up the road, and he watched you come back, and he sent you a little route, and then you'd do an emergency stop, and then towards the end of the test he'd take you back to the test centre, ask you a couple of questions about the highway code, and if it was all good, you'd passed. All done on a 125, and then you could go out and ride anything you wanted. So of course the level of training back then wasn't particularly good, and I think this is where the don't get anything more than a 600cc comes from, because to be honest, it was very appropriate for riders of my generation, unless you were particularly talented. The difference now, of course, is that when I started training motorcyclists over 10 years ago, we had the direct access. If you were 21, you could do direct access, have your unrestricted license, and we also had then the restricted license, which you could do from the age of 17, and you were restricted to 33 brake horsepower. So for between 17 and 20 years of age, 33 brake horsepower restriction, and after 2 years of holding that license, you automatically became fully qualified and could ride what you liked by default. And that was all done on a 125cc motorcycle. Now the EU third directive on driving licences changed that all in January 2013, and that's when we ended up with the current system that we've got now. So 17 and 18 year olds are now absolutely stuck on a 125 regardless of what tests they do. The A1 licence holders, And I think that's really bad, because most youngsters aren't going to spend their time and money to do a test just to ride a 125 without L plates. So they're staying on CBTs, they're not getting extra training, they're not getting extra knowledge. So 19 to 23 years of age, you can do your A2, which is a 47 brake horsepower restriction. So a nice choice of bikes out there now, and that has influenced a lot of the new bikes that we see on the market today. I say new, since 2013 when the rules changed. So in that respect, it's more like back in the day when we used to see 250cc motorcycles, or 300s or 350s, 400s. They sort of disappeared, but now they've made a bit of a re-emergence, which is nice because it does give you that extra level. And okay, after 2 years as an A2 licence holder, you can qualify earlier to get an unrestricted licence. So at 21 you could be unrestricted, but if you want to go direct access, then you now have to be 24. The reason I'm mentioning all this is that if you've spent a couple of years on a 47 brake horsepower bike, or if you've done direct access and been on a training course where you've already been on a 600 and done some really good training with an instructor, it may be that the 600cc bike isn't the be-all and end-all of your apprenticeship like it was back in the old days. And I've seen some fabulous students in my time who, having done training on their 600, passed their test on the 600, to limit them to a 600 really wouldn't be right. And I've seen many of my students go on to ride GSX-R 1000s, BMW R1200, GS's for example, various bikes like Z900s, and they've done very well. So the level of training that you get doesn't immediately just say, let's do the 600 thing, let's do that apprenticeship. I don't think you need to anymore. But what's really important when looking at your first motorcycle is that you can handle that motorcycle with ease, and that it builds your confidence. And I also think, as a new rider, you should have a motorcycle that enables you to keep practicing the skills that you were taught on your course, because courses are very often short, and it doesn't take long. If you don't repeat and hone those skills into a good habit, you will lose them. So U-turns, slalom, figure of eights, all the slow speed control type of stuff, all the stuff that many people say, oh, I don't want to do that. Do you know, the ability to ride that bike well is important to maintain. You don't want to lose those hard-earned skills. So if you buy yourself something where you can't practice those skills on a daily or a weekly basis, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. You don't want something that's so fast it scares the life out of you, and that you can't handle it if you make mistakes, because you will make mistakes. We all do, but a new rider, you're likely to make quite a few more. And you don't want something that's really big and heavy so that it intimidates you. You don't want to go out and ride it, and if you get yourself into a bit of a mess with it, the weight of the bike takes over, and the next thing, it's all on the floor, and then your confidence diminishes, you stop riding. So it's a difficult choice. The other thing that we're sport with these days is choice of motorcycles. We've got bikes from the 80s and 90s and early 2000s that are sort of almost regarded as modern classics in a way now. Some of them are not that expensive, low mileage, good condition, fun bikes, not a lot of money to buy. And then we've got all the modern offerings, which if you buy a lot of them on PCPs are quite affordable on a monthly basis. I mean, back in my day, you used to have commuter bikes. Sports bike market was quite busy. You know, a lot of people had sports bikes. But now if we look at things have changed massively. So sports tourers, not many of them around like there used to be. I mean, I'm riding what is regarded as one of the better or best sports tourers on the market these days by many, including myself. But that is an area of bikes that has diminished over the years. It'd be nice to see it re-emerge a little bit more. Naturally, the adventure bike, now that has really come on in recent times. That was, if I cast my mind back, probably didn't have anything like it back in the day. Well, BMW did have the GS's in the 80s and 90s, but they were nothing like they are now in terms of popularity, and other manufacturers have followed suit. And sports bikes have seen a bit of a decline over the years, and what we like to see now is the naked bike, the Street Fighter. So we've got a nice powerful punchy engine, very responsive, higher bars, wider bars, and the fun of the acceleration and that beautiful handling. So when it comes to the style of bike that you're going to ride, it really is personal preference and personal choice. Depends what you're going to be doing with that bike. But whatever you choose, it really needs to build your confidence. So I can think a friend of mine 10 years ago or more now passed his motorcycle test, bought himself an 1150 BMW Tourer, and it started to destroy his confidence. He didn't like the weight, he didn't like the engine, didn't like the way it produced its power. It just wasn't good for him. So he sold it quite wisely, and he bought a older, more classic 1000cc Kawasaki, and that bike was the making of him. And he went from there to a 1200 130 horsepower BMW, and then moved on to a K1600 BMW, and he's ridden all of those bikes very, very well with a lot of confidence and a lot of fun. So sometimes you do need that slightly smaller, lighter bike as a stepping stone just to get you going. So it's achieving that fine balance between buying something that actually you're bored of within 3 months and think, oh, this is really just tedious, I want a bit more out of life, and jumping up to buying something big and ridiculous that absolutely destroys your confidence and doesn't help you in any way at all. So you will get as many opinions as you will have motorcycles to choose from. But ultimately, it's up to you what you buy. Okay, so let's look at test rides now. So when I first started buying bikes, test rides weren't as common as they are now. I do remember a friend of mine test riding a ZZR 600 in the mid-90s. That was quite a little cracker back in the day. Some nice examples of them around still, actually. But I don't recall testing bikes until about the 2000s. And of course now we can test ride loads of stuff. Test riding is the only way ultimately to decide what bike is suitable for you. So a lot of the time we would just spend our life looking at brochures and going down the showroom, sitting on the bikes, and then eventually you decided to buy something. Whereas of course now you have the opportunity to test ride. And that is the only way to tell if that bike really suits you. But just a couple of things about test riding a motorcycle. To start with, you may not fall in love with it immediately. Don't give up on it within the first 10 to 15 minutes. Persevere. I always think about an hour as a minimum on a test ride decides. Very often you'll say, oh, my hips ache, my knees ache. You do at my age. My arms ache, my wrist aches, my neck aches. It's not unusual. You've just got on something you're not used to. Your body's in a different position, you're not used to it. It will generally adapt and get used to that bike. So don't give up on it too early. Alternatively, you may get on a bike and immediately fall in love with it. I remember, I've heard this more than once, but one student in particular brings to mind. They were dead set on a particular bike, and they'd done all the research, and they said, I think this is my bike, I love it. I said, okay. So they went and test rode it. When they came back, I said, how was your test ride? They said, yeah, it was alright, it was nice. I said, don't buy that bike. And they said, what are you on about? I said, you haven't come back and told me you loved it. You haven't come back lit up with enthusiasm. You said it was nice. Don't think that's your bike. So they went away and they tried a few more bikes, and they got on another bike, and then I got a phone call. Oh, I just love this bike, it's amazing. I knew within the first 5 minutes this was my bike. That's what we're looking for. It's that enthusiasm. you will know if that bike really lights you up or not. And if you've not got a lot of experience of riding motorcycles, don't buy the first bike you ride. You need a few comparisons, because especially if you've been on a 125 for a long time, any big bike's going to seem marvellous. But it doesn't mean it's the bike for you. You know, looks, they're very subjective. You know, I think this Kawasaki's lovely. I think it's a really nice looking bike. I've heard people say, I'm not really sure about looks of that Kawasaki. It's just personal, isn't it? You know, I love all bikes. I wouldn't choose to own all bikes. I couldn't live with all bikes and they wouldn't suit my purposes. But I do like them all because they're bikes. Don't worry about what other people say. If you like that colour, if you like that design, if that makes you feel good, then that's great. Buy it. As long as it rides well for you, you can handle it and you can develop on it. That's what's really important. So as regards that question then, what bike should be my first bike now I've passed my test? First of all, what do you want that bike for? What purpose does it need to achieve? So if it's commuting, consider its ability to carry luggage maybe. Consider its weather protection qualities if you're going to go to work on it. You know, you don't want to be soaking wet and freezing cold by the time you get to work. If you're going touring, make sure it's comfortable enough for you and it can carry any luggage that you require it to carry. Has it got a big enough fuel tank? You're going to be stopping every few moments to put petrol in it. Are you just looking for something for fun? Sunday afternoons, weekday evenings after work, go out for a couple of hours. Just make sure it's suitable for what you want. Looks. Got to fall in love with it really. You want to park it up in the shed or in the car park. Do you look back at the bike and smile? If you don't, why doesn't it excite you enough? Is it worth spending your money on it if it doesn't really excite you? From a development point of view, make sure it's not intimidating. Make sure it's got some element of forgiveness if you get things wrong a little bit. Make sure that you can still practice all your techniques that you've only just learnt, because they're not yet hardwired skills. You need to keep at it to make sure you maintain your ability to manoeuvre slowly, to enhance your balance and your confidence. Doesn't want to be too heavy, but it needs to be fun and enjoyable. And if it ticks all the boxes, you will love your first big bike. So I hope that's given you something to think about. Enjoy riding now that you've passed your test, and I look forward to seeing you next time. So until then, ride safe and take care.